Case 5. The Adventure of the Engineer's Thumb. 1. Of all the great cases Sherlock Holmes had during our friendship, only 2 were brought to his attention by me. The case of Mr. Heatherley's thumb is one of them. It was in the summer of 1889, not long after I got married and returned to practicing medicine. One of my patients was a guard at the nearby railroad station. I had cured him of a long, painful illness, but he was grateful. After that, he sent every sufferer he knew to my office. One morning, a little before 7 o'clock, the maid woke me. The railroad guard had come, she said, with someone in need of my medical skills. I dressed and hurried downstairs. "I have a patient for you, doctor," said the guard. "He seemed to be all right, but I think he's in shock. I was afraid he might wander off, so I brought him here, myself. Now that he's in good hands, I'll get back to my job." A young gentleman, no older than 25, was waiting in my treatment room. A blood-stained handkerchief was wrapped around one of his hands, and his face was very pale. He looked as if he were struggling to control some great emotion. "I'm sorry to get you up so early, doctor," he said, "but I had a serious accident during the night. I arrived by train this morning and asked at the station where I could find a doctor. My name is Victor Heatherley." "I'm sorry I kept you waiting," I said. "An overnight train ride can be quite dull enough, I know." "Oh, I would hardly call my night dull," he said and laughed. He laughed harder and harder, with a high ringing note. I recognize it as the hysteria that sometimes comes over a person who has come through a great crisis. "Pull yourself together," I snapped. But he laughed until it wore him out. Then he gazed at me with weary eyes. "I'm sorry," he said. "That's all right. Drink this." I gave him some water. He drank it down. "Thank you, doctor," he said. "That's better. Now, perhaps you should take care of my thumb, or at least the place where my thumb used to be." He unwrapped the handkerchief and held out his hand. Even with all my experience as a wartime army doctor, the sight made me shudder. There, next to his 4 fingers, was a horrid red spot where a thumb should have been. It had been hacked right off. "Good heavens!" I cried. "What a terrible injury! It must have bled a lot." "Yes," said he. "I fainted. When I came to, I wrapped it as tightly as I could, and it seemed to help." "You did a very good job," I told him as I examined his wound. "This was done with a very sharp and heavy instrument." "A cleaver," he said. "Was it an accident?" I asked. "Absolutely not," he replied. "A murderous attack?" "Very murderous indeed," he said. I cleaned and treated the wound, then wrapped it in bandages. "That's much better, thank you," he said. "Now, I must go tell my tale to the police. It's such a strange story, though, that if it weren't for this wound of mine, I doubt that they would believe me. I couldn't blame them. I haven't a shred of proof, and no way to find the villain who did this. If you need a problem solved, you should see my friend, Sherlock Holmes," I told him. "Sherlock Holmes? I've heard of that fella," said my patient. "I would be very happy if he would take my case. Would you introduce me to him?" "Of course," I said. "We'll call a cab and go to him at once."